Welcome to Learning Aloud, a podcast from the Organizational Dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania, produced to inspire purposeful leadership practice and transform organizational experience. I am your host, Zach Davis. Joining us today in our virtual Zoom studio is Katie Newsom, Chief Advancement Officer for Outward Bound. The daughter of a career Foreign Service officer, Katie's experiential education began early in life, growing up in varied locations around the world and graduating from high school in Jakarta, Indonesia. While living in Washington, D.C. during her middle school years, Katie participated in an Outward Bound course that continues to serve as a point of inspiration in her adult life. Katie served as the founding executive director of the Philadelphia Outward Bound School for 20 years, leaving that role in 2018, just prior to the opening of the Discovery Center, a project she led for 9 years in partnership with Audubon, Pennsylvania. Today, she serves as the Chief Advancement Officer for Outward Bound USA and is a member of the Outward Bound International Board's Operations Committee. Katie, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Zach. It's nice to be here.
So, experiential learning, what does that mean for you? What's the value of experiential learning over a traditional classroom experience?
It's a great question, except that I think that we all learn experientially. We just don't put a name to it. But experiential learning to me means that you learn by doing, that you experience something and you stop and reflect and think about it. And then you take what you've learned from that experience and apply it to the rest of your life. So there's a very simple model for experiential learning that we refer to quite a bit. It's do, reflect, apply. And so early in the early years of Outward Bound was actually started in 1941 during the Second World War, when an experiential educator named Kurt Hahn, who had founded a school in Scotland called Gordonston, insisted that his students learn by doing, so that they experience things like mountain rescue skills training and training in open water and ocean rescue, because those experiences allowed the students to both grow individually, but also allowed them to develop skills to be of service to others. So that is the sort of essence of experiential learning as applied to Outward Bound, that we take students on challenging adventures and we give them challenging learning experiences, and then we help them to reflect on what they have learned, and then we encourage them to apply it to the rest of the time that they're on an Outward Bound course. But then they take that concept of do, reflect, apply into the rest of their lives.
That's powerful, and it's so simple. It's very easy to kind of take with you, that do, reflect, apply. So you mentioned in your early years you took an Outward Bound course, had a big impact on you. So what was that course? How did it shape your path?
So I was in a middle high school in Washington, D.C. It was a private school, and we had an Outward Bound instructor from the United Kingdom who came to experiment, really, to offer an opportunity for an experiential learning outdoor experience. And I was one of the students that volunteered to sort of test out this program. We did a 10-day rock climbing and backpacking expedition in the Monongahela National Forest and the Dolly Sods area of West Virginia. And it was a pretty powerful learning experience. It was many, many years ago, before they had a lot of technical rock climbing equipment and so forth. So we tied our own Swiss seat harnesses and we climbed Seneca Rocks, which is a very steep and high rock face in West Virginia. My instructor was up above me on a butt belay, which was the early ways of climbing. I don't think we had helmets at the time. This was in the early 70s. And we did things that I, first of all, had never sort of imagined doing. And the fact that I was able to scale a rock face and climb to the top and then rappel down the other side at age 14 was a pretty powerful learning experience for me. What I took away from that was that nothing that you face is insurmountable. You really need to accept that you're taking on a challenge, and you need to sort of reinforce your own belief in yourself to overcome that challenge, or to resolve the problem, or to meet whatever it is that you need to do in order to resolve where you are. And that experience of recognizing on my course that I could do things I never thought were possible is exactly what I carried away.
Hmm. So were you a big outdoor person before you went on this trip? Did you spend a lot of time outside? Were you oriented that way?
Well, that's an interesting question because, as a foreign service brat, as we used to call ourselves, I had come back to the U.S. after 4 years of elementary school in Libya. My dad was stationed as ambassador to Libya in the mid to late 60s, and so we went to school on the air base. There was an American air base outside of Tripoli at that time, and we did a lot of hiking and desert exploration. And I remember my dad taking us on a trip into the Sahara Desert, in Land Rovers, as a family with another couple of families. And so camping and outdoor things were sort of a part of who we were as a family. And so the opportunity to participate in the challenge experience that was offered to me in ninth grade wasn't something I was afraid of doing, but it was also something that I was sort of curious about.
Hmm. So what would you say to someone that may not have that same passion for the outdoors? Well, I don't know if I could camp, or if I could, do some of the things that you described. What would you say to somebody like that in terms of evaluating an outward bound experience?
Well, that's a question that I've often been asked. So, so generally, what I say is that you don't know what you're capable of until you try new things, and that we spend our lives living most of our lives inside our comfort zones. And at Outward Bound, we define this as, your comfort zone is, especially let's talk about it during this time, during a pandemic, your comfort zone is your house. And, and so your comfort zone is where you know what's in your refrigerator. You've probably stocked your refrigerator. You know what you want to watch on TV. You're comfortable with, your bed. You're comfortable in your bed. Those are things that are really feel homey, right? And safe, and you feel very comfortable there, right? But truthfully, you're not really learning when you live in your comfort zone. It's when you step outside your comfort zone. Let's take the pandemic as an example. When you decide, okay, I've got to go to the grocery store. Right there, you're stepping outside your comfort zone because you're going into a place where you're going to be exposed to other people and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even when you're wearing a mask, it's still sort of stepping outside a place of comfort. When you do an Outward Bound course, or when you do something challenging in nature, you're going into a place that you're not familiar with. So you're stepping outside of your comfort zone, and you're in a place where you are able to learn new things, to discover new things, to discover, wow, I never really realized, that I could watch ants for an hour, and all of these little ants are doing something, right? Or I never realized that I could watch a stream, tumble over rocks, and then be curious about that. These are new things that I would be learning as someone stepping outside my comfort zone. At Outward Bound, we also present our students with challenges. So oftentimes when we step outside our comfort zone, we go into our learning zone. we may get into a place where we're a little bit in our panic zone. And for me, that always happens when, for example, someone says, okay, we're going to do a rappel and you're just going to sit back in your harness and step off this cliff. And I'm like, we don't really want our students to go into the panic zone, because when you go into your panic zone, you completely shut down. Right.
Mhm.
And so for people that are really afraid of, rock climbing or rappel or something, you have to really support those people and let them know that they're okay and that everything is going to be fine. They just need to trust themselves and bring them back into the learning zone, out of the panic zone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of parallels to that when you look at a change management initiative
Right.
in a company. There's very similar thoughts that you go into. You're pushing people out of their comfort zone, and
Exactly.
you have to balance that nudging with not making somebody feel like you just told them to jump off the cliff. To work within. It sounds like it's a delicate balance. As much as it may be for a company or somebody orchestrating a large organizational change, when you're in the field and trying to weigh, is this something we can nudge someone to do to step out, or is this going to push them into that panic zone? I like the way you frame that.
Exactly. And I'll also add, Zach, that if you apply the experiential learning model to that, so you step outside your comfort zone into your learning zone, you do something, then you pause to reflect on it and talk about it and say, okay, what did we learn? And then you're able to apply that, and your comfort zone gets bigger and bigger, right? So you get more comfortable with going out into nature or going out to do things that are challenging. You are absolutely right about organizational transformation. And I think that there are many people that we read about in graduate school who would tell you that organizations can't grow, they can't thrive unless they spend most of their time in the learning zone. So being complacent in what you do and what your mission is and what your goals and objectives are as an organization is great, but it's not going to sustain you. It's not going to allow you to grow and thrive. In order to grow and thrive, you have to step outside your comfort zone and take on challenges and make changes.
And that approach appears to be woven throughout that outward bound experience. Even down to the where the focus. I see that outward bound focuses on the expedition members are crew, not passengers.
Yes,
So
exactly.
right out of the gate, you're setting that expectation that no one's carrying your bag for you. I mean, you mentioned you literally tied your own harness. So
right.
you can't not participate in the experience.
Exactly.
You
No, that's right.
it.
You're in it. And I've actually, I've taken a number of adults out on expedition, and I am always sort of fascinated, no matter how much you brief adults, this is what's going to happen. These are the things to expect. I've still had groups on the second day who say, wait, where's the cook? And I want to point out, well, no, so this is a learning experience. So you guys are the cooks. We're all going to cook together. How about that?
Yep. Everybody, I hope somebody brought the cook set.
Yeah, right. Yeah, check your bag. We packed it at course start. Yep. That's what Outward Bound is about. Everyone is crew. There are no passengers. You can't just come along for the ride. You got to be a part of the experience.
Well, and I think that's a really empowering formula as well. When you have that ability, when you're constantly doing, reflecting, applying, you're every person who's engaged in that experience, they're also part of their own experience. So while they may be pushed, into that learning zone, they're pushed out of their comfort zone, those periodic pauses to reflect and then apply to the next situation, that really helps engage them as part of their own process too.
Yes. And not everybody is a really good reflector. I once had a group I was doing a team building exercise with from a major corporation. And I remember, we always start a team building day with, okay, let's make our team charter. What are the things that about today that we want to encourage as our, good behaviors or our, sort of aspects of the way in which we work together. So I left them with a flip chart and a marker, and I said, let's put together our team charter, and then we can reflect on this as we go through the day, right? And I came back, I went to grab my gear, and I came back, and they had 3 things on the list. One was win at all costs. The second one was weed out the weak. And the third one was win at all costs. And I said, oh, okay, let's talk about this. And I had their managing partner break down and say, you're not going to feed us your granola stuff all day, are you? And I was like, no, but let's talk about, how we work together as a team. They got it by the end of the day, but it was the rough start.
Win at all costs. That would have been interesting if they'd been on board at your first West Virginia course and face rock face. It's like, all right, so
yeah, winning, right?
Oh man. So what do you see, as students have gone through this experience, the adult leaders, youth leaders, what are there any kind of common surprises, anything that you're aha moments that you're hoping participants take away? Like what are the most common, I guess, personal surprises that somebody might go through from start to finish on an Outward Bound expedition?
So the longer the course, the more takeaways there are, right? But if we were to start by talking about even a one-day team building day, right? When you bring together a group of people in a small team, say 10 to 12 people, and you start the day, what you discover is that people, even if they know each other, don't really know each other. And when you are presented with challenges that you have to solve, you always, you see sometimes the people who feel that they need to be the natural leaders in the group for whatever reason that is imposed on them, title or what have you, right? Length of time in the job. When you see that happening, you see people trying to talk over other people trying to insert their ideas, trying to take control of the group. But gradually, as a good facilitator, you will adapt the group to be able to stop and reflect, right? What's happening? Is everyone given a chance to share their ideas and that kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And adults are not terribly different from kids, except that adults have figured out how to be a little bit more discreet or sly about about their behaviors. Kids are just right up front, Kids will tell you, well, he bugs me all the time, or, she's really irritable and I can't stand the way she talks, or I'm too shy to be able to put my ideas forward, right? Kids will be honest with you, right? Mm-hmm. And adults, just sort of wait until you figured it out. And then once you've figured it out and elevated it as a question or a concern, or ideally someone else in the group has figured out a behavior that's holding back the team, then you can talk about it, then you can apply it. And so when you're doing a series of challenging activities together, the challenges get increasingly more difficult, right? So maybe we do something called the Alligator River, right? And you give the group 3 big baseball bases, right? The portable ones. And you have to move your whole group from one side of a field to the other side of the field. And the only thing you have are these 3 baseball. And they have to figure it out. And it gets pretty hard because it gets physical too. They have to sometimes, carry somebody from one side to the other. So they've got to figure out in the group how to get people comfortable with making that decision, and then how to trust each other, right? Trust is a huge aspect of it. And when they succeed as a team because they could not have done it individually. And that sense of success is what they take away. But before they get to that success, they probably failed 2 or 3 times. And for me, that's the secret sauce of any Outward Bound experience, is the opportunity to fail On a one-day program, you can fail by just not being able to solve a problem. But so long as you are able to break down what's holding you back, then you can identify it, then you can apply it, and then you can be successful.
Hmm.
On an expedition, oftentimes a group, because everybody is a crew, everybody takes a role, the navigators, the map and the compass is handed to somebody in the group to figure it out. There's some lessons, but once you've got somebody who can navigate in the group, you pass it on, you share that learning experience. And then those students have to navigate. Well, oftentimes a student will navigate, I don't know, a couple miles down the trail in the wrong direction. And every once in a while you'll hear an instructor in the back go, is everybody comfortable with the direction in which we're going? And then the students will stop and they'll try to refigure it out. And then you have a problem, especially if you've navigated 5 miles in the wrong direction. Because now it may be getting dark, it may be getting cold, you may need to set up camp, but you're not where you're supposed to be. So there's a lot of figuring out what happens when you fail, and then figuring out how to overcome it and move past it and be successful.
And on those longer expeditions, especially, how do you mitigate that risk? Like, right, like would you ever reach a point where there's too much failure, or where you've got to intervene because now, you to draw on some of your earlier examples, like maybe you're pushing somebody towards their panic room, or the group is now in a very unsafe position. How do you mitigate that risk, allowing them to fail, but not turn into something catastrophic?
Yes. So that is the secret sauce of risk management, right? And instructors are trained in scenarios and they've been in this course area 100 times, and they're, an outward bound instructor is a highly skilled individual. They're wilderness first responders. They're people who've taken, the American Canoe Association certification in whitewater, rescue. They're very highly skilled individuals, and so they can see risk coming a mile away. You can't always mitigate it all. So that's when you have to, really depend on your crew to be able to, if somebody sprains their ankle, this individual isn't going to be able to hike 10 miles for the rest of the week. So you're going to have to figure out, how are we going to hike them out? Or we're going to have to do it together. We're going to have to create a litter. We're going to have to, respond. But by and large, risk management is a huge part of what we do. But that's why Outward Bound is recognized as one of the, setting the standard in the field of outdoor risk management and protocols, policies, protocols.
Sure. So given that, and you shared some really interesting thoughts too around kids versus adults and the experience in that. And, and that's one of the great things about working with kids is they are brutally honest. And you can generally know pretty quickly where they stand. So given the choice, right? If you're leading an expedition, you get tapped for, your choice expedition tomorrow. Are you taking a group of kids, or are you taking a group of adults?
I would take either, right? I mean, I love working with both youth and adults, especially. So the youth that are really sort of in Outward Bound's sort of main focus is youth. And that's youth between the ages of really 11, 12 and 24, 25, right? And so working with young people in those sort of formative years is challenging, but incredibly inspiring. Young people have that are learning about what's possible for them and seeing new experiences. Living something that they never thought they would be doing. That kind of learning is incredibly inspiring to watch. In my work in Philadelphia, we served hundreds of thousands of kids over a 20-year period. And it was always the same, whether they were on a one-day experience where they were climbing up to the top of a 30-foot pole and jumping off and sharing a goal about themselves, or whether they were canoeing down a river and had just gone through a, class 2 rapid and no one had tipped, and, that sort of feeling of just pure exhilaration that they're doing something really cool.
That's great. So you served as the director for Philadelphia Outward Bound. So shifting gears a little bit, you started to talk about the impact on some of the students that go through there, and the impact on the youth, and expanding their horizons and new experiences. What can you share about the impact that Outward Bound school has had on the Philadelphia community and your tenure as the director there?
So I came to Outward Bound in Philadelphia when we were a small sort of grassroots organization that was raising money in Philadelphia to send about 30 to 40 students a year on Outward Bound programs that were run actually out of our partner school in Baltimore. So we would put the kids in Philadelphia on a school bus, and they would go down to Baltimore. And then in Baltimore, they had a program that had been operating longer. And so they were able to take the students from Philadelphia out on short expedition courses. And when I came to what was then called the Philadelphia Friends of Outward Bound, there was a small group of us, including our former mayor, Michael Nutter, who at the time was a councilman. We would sit around a table at PNC Bank, because one of our board members was at PNC, and we would talk about, how we wanted to grow and build a program in Philadelphia. And when the full-time position as what was then the program director became available in 1999, I threw my hat in the ring and took on that job in November of 1999. And we had complimentary desk space in the middle of the park ranger's office in Fairmount Park. And we had a high ropes course in the Wissahickon, but we had not, we were running it maybe 2 days out of the year. And we had about 10 schools, and the school district of Philadelphia was a partner from the beginning. We had about 10 public schools with whom we worked, and we were serving about maybe somewhere between 50 and 100 kids a year. And I remember, whether it was Mayor Nutter or one of the other board members who sort of said to me, well, okay, now your job is to start delivering program in Philadelphia and grow this thing. And so the first course we developed was a 5-day urban expedition in the city of Philadelphia. And so we started on the Schuylkill River. We did a little bit of a paddle on the Schuylkill River, and then we made our way back into the city via public transportation. But it was an expedition, and we were spending the night in a church down at 4th and Race, and we spent the night on Penn's Landing, and we spent the night at the zoo one night. And we had all of these terrific partnerships. And the kids were able to do little service projects along the way, but they were also backpacking, right? And setting up their sleeping gear and doing a traditional Outward Bound course. And that, was in 2000, we ran our first courses. And, by 2006, the Philadelphia Outward Bound School was really well developed. And we had branched out into course area in the Delaware Water Gap and out to Michoud State Forest in South Central Pennsylvania. And we were on a pathway of growth. And that's where we sort of kept meeting our challenges and kept saying, what do we need to do more? We knew we needed a permanent facility. And by 2008, we had sort of put out feelers into the community to say, hey, we don't need to do this by ourselves. Who would like to partner with us on a facility idea? And that's where we met Audubon, Pennsylvania. And the next thing you know, we had a project underway together to build the Discovery Center. And so all of those things were a real Outward Bound course for the Philadelphia Outward Bound School. It was, we were applying what we were doing. We were reflecting on it. We were then applying it more. There was a lot of teamwork involved in building the Philadelphia Outward Bound School.
Well, and it's fascinating. I see a lot of parallels between some of the things you talked about earlier around stepping outside of your comfort zone and kind of almost reframing everyday type experiences, or maybe not everyday experiences, but reframing the immediate world around you. As you were taught that urban expedition, it's fascinating. It sounds a lot like when you were talking about going to the grocery store now during the pandemic, like a whole different experience. And I can't imagine that how you just expand. I remember the first time I paddled in the Schuylkill River, and I was like, I've driven past this hundreds of times, and this is really cool. And I'm in this like whole other world, but yet you're right in the middle of Philadelphia. So it gives you that different perspective. So, kudos to you and the team for taking, that world that the kids are immersed in and then giving them an entirely different lens, and experience to participate in that.
The best part was when you would have a group of kids on an expedition and they'd be walking down, I don't know, South Street or, somewhere in the city. And then you'd hear from the other side of the street, "Hey, Outward Bound," because we had alumni on the other side of the street that had done it 3 or 4 years ago that were recognizing what was happening. Those were moments that were really precious. And I think for me anyway, because, I left in 2018 just before the Discovery Center opened. So for me, there were some really powerful moments when the school district asked us to start working with 9th grade students to try to build bonds of peer groups in 9th grade, because that would help to address the dropout rate. When we had schools coming to us and saying, we really need Outward Bound in the school. And so they would write us letters explaining what they needed from us. And we would use that to help try to find funding to make it possible. It's not uncommon knowledge that, it's expensive to run an Outward Bound course. We're outfitting students head to toe in outdoor gear, and we don't expect our students to come to us with all the high-end gear and equipment that you can possibly buy. We want to make sure that our students are warm and dry in the field and that they're comfortable as much as they can be, but not too comfortable. And then when they come, we send them out on their courses. When they come back from their courses, we would gather, invite their parents and their caregivers and their aunts and uncles and their siblings and their dogs and their, ministers from their neighborhood churches would all come out, and we would have a big graduation ceremony, and the kids would tell us about what they learned about themselves on the course. Those were the powerful moments. Those were the times we knew we were making a difference.
Yeah. And it's great. It's a true systems approach to that experience. I mean, even all the way down to trying to address, issues of dropout in school. I mean, this is talk about the applying piece of this, really helping to grow that and connecting, all throughout the community. That's amazing. So I right now, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, and there's opportunities. I mean, some of the things that you said early on are just incredibly powerful as we're going through a pandemic right now. I mean, there's lessons that people can apply, just in looking at things differently and finding ways to overcome challenges. So how do you deliver an experiential learning environment in a pandemic? I mean, we would be normally having this conversation face to face, not through a camera. So how do you, given those kind of constraints, how is Outward Bound still, working to deliver that type of experience?
Yeah, so that is a great question, because this year has been like no other for Outward Bound. So for the first time in the United States in 58 years, Outward Bound did not run any in-person summer expedition courses. And summer is our high season, spring, summer, and fall. And 2020, we pulled students out of the field in mid-March when COVID really took hold in the United States. And we have not, we launched our first long course, so semester long course for college age students in September, because we could ensure that the students could be tested before they came, could arrive by private car, could be contained in a small group setting for 10 days before we put them out in the field and create a COVID bubble, a COVID-free bubble. And so we've only done that with a few hundred students this year, starting in September, and only at 2 of our regional schools. We have 11 regional outward bound schools. So the pandemic really set us back in terms of our operating plan. However, being creative and courageous and always willing to step a little bit outside of our comfort zone into our learning zone, our incredible outward bound field instructors, program staff came together across the nation and started talking about virtual programming and piloting virtual programming where they could still bring together a team of people via Zoom and conduct challenging activities that allowed for learning to happen through a Zoom platform. Incredibly creative work. And now we have created a series of virtual programs called the Thriving Classroom. And these programs are intended to help educators develop skills and resources and tools to work with their students via Zoom. So these are programs that are now being delivered in various community settings where we have relationships and partnerships with schools and school districts. So we're still going. We're really hoping to try to, bring more students back in person next year. But it has not been without its challenges.
And it's I commend you on that piece, on the thriving classroom, because that's we've seen so much with educators. I mean, there's no playbook. There was no academic playbook for educators in terms of, hey, we're going to take this classroom thing that we've been doing for years or decades, or even beyond that, and we're going to flip it all onto a screen, and we've got a couple days to do it, in some cases, and go, and trying to replicate that experience. And so it's great that Outward Bound is kind of helping to lead and lead by example in that case, because it is challenging. I think in some cases, some of the other guests we've had on the program have talked about how the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. There may not have been a place for virtual before, but now it's undeniable. Virtual has a seat at the table, and virtual may always have a seat at the table. There are definitely some positives to come out of that. So it's great to hear about the ways in which Outward Bound is kind of leaning forward to help improve that experience.
Exactly.
I want to touch on that one thing you had said earlier too about that secret sauce, in the Outward Bound program, and that ability to fail. And we talked about it somewhat, and then in terms of the risk management, but that kind of providing that ability to fail as part of that learning environment. And I think it's such a unique, it's a unique thing in learning right now. I feel like you don't see that. There's so much concern about, well, we need to eliminate weakness. We need to provide the perfect thing. I mean, I think you said it perfectly when you talked about the one corporate group that said, win at all costs. It's like, well, that's, I feel like failure is not an option. It's something that could plug right into the bottom of that charter. Yet so much of the experience is that secret sauce.
Yes. So there's a little bit noise in the background, so forgive me for a minute. So here's the secret sauce is applied in the following way, right? That when we are constantly successful, and we are constantly and we are feeling very comfortable and safe in our success, we aren't really learning. And it's only when we challenge ourselves, either because we have to, because something that we've always been doing didn't work anymore, that we really discover what's possible to do differently, or how we can change, right? And what more we could do. So if we, so when you're, let's take it in the organizational capacity, okay? So if an organization is set up to generate, say, $2 million in operating revenue every year, right? And all of a sudden, and you've been doing that for 20 years, right? And you have a staff of people that is, that are constant, and you don't have change, right? People aren't leaving, and you need to train someone new, or, right? You're not really going to, you're going to get stagnant, right? And so when something happens and you lose a revenue stream, all of a sudden you have to work differently. You have to change in order to adapt to that. Either you're going to shrink as an organization, or you're going to say, oh, look, there's an opportunity to do more, to in this area that we hadn't really tried before. Failure, or what we would normally term as failure, or an unexpected change, requires an organization to dig deeper and do more with what they have. And in that process, there's a recognition that, oh, okay, there's new opportunities we could pursue. There are new things that we can do. Or that's one choice. The other choice is to fold up shop and go away. Right? So even at Outward Bound, there have been many times as an organization when we've said, okay, the way we're operating doesn't really work. So let's try to change it. Let's change our fiscal year. Let's, and all of those things are learning experiences, but they're also challenging experiences, because you can fail. So the pandemic was one of those situations for us as an organization, and we had a choice. We could, I don't know that it was ever suggested that we could shut down. But I know that in my current role as the Chief Advancement Officer, I'm responsible for philanthropic revenue. And so I remember talking to the executive director and saying, and he and I had both come together from regional school executive director roles to serve the national organization at a time when the national organization was looking towards a new strategy to grow and expand Outward Bound. And so we came on board, and I remember in March saying to Josh, we have to raise a lot of money, and we have to raise it now. And we had, some board members who said, now's not the right time. It's uncertain. People are uncertain. They're not sure if they're going to, what's going to happen. So that it may not be the right time to ask. And I remember saying to Josh, no, we have to ask. We have to ask now, and we have to ask tomorrow, and we have to ask next week, and we have to keep asking, because we need to raise a lot of money now in order for us as a national organization to be able to sustain the operations of our regional schools, who are not going to be able to deliver a program. So facing that challenge and being brave and sort of taking it on is part of that response to failure, right? But you have to fail. And that, I think, for the work that we did in Philadelphia with our students and our schools, the one most interesting takeaway from that work was that the people who often learned the most on an Outward Bound course or expedition were the teachers, because teachers are trained not to allow their students to fail. They're trained to sort of measure testing and to, testing demonstrates success, and that it's important for teachers to be able to teach students successfully. And we're measured on your success as a teacher in teaching students to succeed, right? To learn and succeed. But at Outward Bound, we let our students fail. We want them to fail. We sometimes push them to fail, because it's only through failure that the students are able to learn. And when a teacher sees their students struggling or failing, it's really hard to watch that. Mm-hmm. But what they learn on Outward Bound is that their students themselves have the tools and resources inside them to be able to overcome that failure. And that's pretty remarkable.
And there's a powerful takeaway in that too for leaders of an organization. You can apply that to leading a team through things, and right. You have to resist that temptation at times to step in and do it for them. And actually by doing that, you're potentially robbing them of the experience to learn, of that the ability to learn and to grow. If you step in too often and do that for them, that's there's a servant leader message buried.
So you remember that team?
Yeah.
The team that I told you about that said, win at all costs, weed out the weak. So it was January. Yeah. We were upstate New York, and I had a group of 10. And in my group, I had the managing partner, I had the CEO, and I had that one of their newest manager level recruits who was from Pakistan. And then I had a few other people in the group. And so after I came back and I saw this chart and their statements, and we sort of had a little chat about it, and I could see there was some tension there and some nervous energy. And so I said, okay, well, let's start our first activity. And so I explained to them that, in Nepal, that when you're mountain climbing Mount Everest, for example, or any of the high mountains in Nepal, that you hire Sherpas to guide you in the mountain, right? And the Sherpas are highly skilled and very knowledgeable, and they will lead you, right? So we were going to do a Sherpa walk, which meant that the Sherpa in the front of our group could see and talk. And every other member of the group was blindfolded, and they had to attach their hands to the shoulders of the person in front of them. And we were going to go for a walk in the woods in January in upstate New York. So I asked the young Pakistani if he spoke Urdu. And he said yes. And I said, okay, so the only language that you can use as the Sherpa in this group is Urdu. And you are going to lead this group through the forest, right? They're all going to be blindfolded, but attached. And I'm going to be there to help keep everybody, from falling or tripping or whatever. He said, okay, I'll do it. Right now, he's young, a new manager in a high-powered, high-energy company, but he did it. Right. And the CEO
in a group that said win at all costs, right? Like there's a lot of pressure riding on this.
The CEO was at the end of the line, and he was so skeptical. And I said, come on, you signed on to this. This is an activity. We're all in agreement. We're going to do it. Mm-hmm. We marched through the woods for about 40 minutes. And the only language that this young man spoke was Urdu, and it was beautiful. It was perfect because they couldn't understand him. Then the person behind had to kind of figure it out. Oh, we're stepping over a rock. And then, so they had to work together. And by the end of the day, they got it. Right. So
that's
it's
awesome.
about, and in today's world, Zach, it's about really, and this is probably, sharing a little bit of my bias, but people can learn to work with other people if they're willing to take that, take that at heart and be committed to that. So it is possible to collaborate and to work together as a team, but you have to be willing to try.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's just very powerful lessons there. I think, and that ties right back to what you initially said about you've got to be willing to step out of your comfort zone, and you've got to. It's when you do that and you go into that learning zone that these amazing experiences can lead to things, and you see this all throughout. I mean, just a very simple exercise and talk about the trust that it took for those other people in that single file line, blindfolded, freezing upstate New York to okay, we're going to do
trust,
this, and look at what they were able to accomplish. So there's a lot of powerful lessons to draw. And I see what you mean, where it's hard to say which group you'd rather instruct, with these wide-eyed kids that are just now open to whole new experiences versus, crusty veterans that have been in the corporate world maybe too long and teaching old dogs new
Seasoned.
tricks. Seasoned. There you go. So, the last thing I wanted to ask you about was, so you mentioned then this philanthropic revenue. I know you've been really hard at work over the last couple of weeks putting together a really amazing program for the annual benefit. And again, I mean, this is a reimagined event. Typically would be in person with a lot of fanfare, and now it's virtual. But still, you've got some really powerhouse speakers. Could you take a couple minutes and kind of talk about that and what people can expect coming up on November 18th?
Yes. So usually, so Outward Bound USA, which is the national organization that is really in a federated model here in the United States, the national organization sort of guides and leads the Outward Bound regional schools in areas such as brand and marketing and managing the risk management and insurance program. And we have a national safety director, and so we are the sort of nuts and bolts, whereas the regional schools are the program delivery and the really sort of where the learning happens. So for OBUSA, we every year have to raise our own funds to support our operations, and they're not as glamorous as serving students on powerful learning expeditions. So this year, we can't do our annual fundraising event, which we have done traditionally in person in New York City. And so we took on the challenge of doing a virtual event. So we have learned a lot about the opportunities that come through virtual programming, and we're excited to launch this event on November 18th. Our sort of key speakers we have three powerful speakers. The first is Angela Lee Duckworth, who is University of Pennsylvania's Character Lab CEO and founder. And Angela is talking, having a conversation with our two student alumni MCs. We have two amazing students who are going to MC this event. They're having a conversation with Angela about obviously grit and perseverance and resilience and understanding how individuals can build those skills within themselves, and it's certainly at the heart of what we do at Outward Bound. So that's one of the powerful opportunities. The other learning opportunity at this event is with two amazing women, Sally Jewell, who was the former Secretary of the Interior under the Obama administration, also the former CEO of REI Corporation, which is a big outdoor provider of gear and equipment, and Rue Mapp, who is both an Outward Bound alum and the founder and CEO of an organization called Outdoor Afro, which is making access possible for people of color to experience the outdoors with joy. And we're super excited to have these two women in a conversation together. They know each other, they're friends, and they're going to be talking about how more people can access nature and the outdoors across the United States, in national parks and in city parks and in their own communities, and how important that is to our well-being. So that are really meaningful. And then a lot of other fun things like some videos and message from our CEO and our board chair. So
nice. That sounds
not
great.
To be missed.
Yeah, I'm gonna, and we'll include for our listeners. We're gonna include the link to the bio. But it sounds like just a tremendous opportunity to learn from some really amazing people in and around the outdoor space, and hopefully help with that philanthropic revenue component as well to keep the programs going.
Yep.
So Katie, now I wanted to shift gears a little bit to the segment that we added for season 2, Learning Aloud. It's our rapid fire questions.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I just want the first word or sentence that pops into your mind to help our listeners understand even a little bit more about the person on the other side of the microphone.
Okay.
So question number 1, what is one thing you would most like to do in your life that you've not yet done?
One thing. Well, I want to travel. I want to travel some more. And I have traveled, but there are many places that I haven't been to. I want to go to Africa.
Africa? All right.
Like sub-Saharan Africa.
I was going to say, for someone who lived in Libya and did expeditions, you may have to qualify.
South of the equator or south of the Sahara. Yeah.
All right. Question number 2. In your opinion, what is one thing the world needs right now?
Compassion.
And question 3, if you were back in school today, thinking about starting a career, what would you want to be when you grow up?
Wow, that's a good question. Whatever I chose to do, I would want to be doing something that makes a positive difference.
Okay. Thank you. So, question number 4, what hobby or activity outside of your work brings you joy?
Hiking in amazing places. We were able to escape to Idaho and Montana this summer, and it is really happy to be up in the fields of wildflowers, and it's amazing. So hiking is my sweet spot there.
Fantastic. Question number 5, what person, living or past, has inspired you the most?
Well, okay, so in recent times, I would say RBG. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a pioneer for women in so many ways. And as we came to get to know her, even in her later years, most recently through various movies and conversations that she had, I think she is just an amazing inspiration to all of us, for her bravery and her willingness to step outside her comfort zone.
Thank you. And last question. What's the last thing that you read?
So right now I'm reading Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety. Rereading. It's a great book.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So
you are
Katie,
welcome.
It's been a lot of fun. I've been talking today with Katie Newsom, the Chief Advancement Officer for Outward Bound. Be sure to check out the amazing virtual benefit gathering that we were talking about. It's called Resilient Together, and it's going to be on Wednesday, November 18th. You can find out more at outwardbound.org/events. The link will also be in the bio, but some amazing guest speakers, amazing learning opportunities, and also a chance to support a great cause and continue the experiential learning program and experience that Outward Bound has to offer. So, Katie, thanks again for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And special thanks to our technical producer, Dan Shields. And with that, I'm Zach Davis with Learning Aloud, a podcast for the organizational dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania.